Okay, so we'll resume our meeting. And what we're up to is item 4 on the agenda, which is public question time and submissions. And councillors will now get all public questions and comments on report items from members of the public. All requests to speak were required to be submitted by 4 p.m. this afternoon at the time of registering to speak. Submitters were given the option to join the WebEx meeting virtually and ask their questions live during the meeting, or have an officer read their statement on their behalf. Statements submitted by members of the public will be read by the Coordinator of Governance. Okay, so first up, I call upon Anne Gowanda. She's speaking to item 7.1, petition response request for removal of tree, Wordsworth Street, St Kilda.
Thank you. Good evening. We're very disappointed, to say the least, that the recommendation for our petition to remove the tree be denied. The denial, according to the statement, is based on the policy that removal of a tree is only approved when there is no other viable option. The assessment states that a viable option in this case is to prune the tree to limit the tree material falling into the courtyard during shedding season. But this is no solution at all. It's a tall and bushy tree which looms over our courtyard. On any even slightly windy day, the spores from the tree cover our courtyard surfaces. As a result, we cannot hang out our washing, we cannot sit outside with our family, including our grandson, who has allergy and skin issues, and for at least 6 months of the year, our courtyard is completely unusable. All of this is made much more difficult for us, older people, in this time of COVID. We are sure that your arborist department would confirm this, because the arborist we spoke to confirmed it. Christian Renaud told us that he would support the petition and that he himself would not buy a house with this tree outside it, as it is outside our house. You concede that there are health implications with this tree. You say that, quote, this species can cause allergic reactions and skin irritations, finish quote. This is exactly what we argued and asked for, the removal of the tree on that basis, and on the basis of the discomfort and pain caused by these sharp spores. Our grandson suffers from severe allergies and has skin issues. He also has asthma. While you say that there is no evidence of an asthma effect, that is no proof that there isn't one. As for scientific research, which you say could change your policy, surely you are not suggesting that we should undertake this research. That's your responsibility. And to err on the side of caution, you should accept that it may have an asthma effect. The fact is that the council is responsible for the planting of these trees, and that it is therefore your responsibility to develop scientific evidence when your ratepayers tell you that it is having health effects. We have done what was suggested to us by Christian Renaud when we spoke to him, and limited our petition to the particular tree causing us problems. We set out our unique circumstances. We did this so that the trees would not become a wider issue. Clearly, you believe these trees are a problem, as you have stopped planting them. This is not about the greening of Port Phillip, which we entirely support. We would welcome a replacement tree. But this particular tree is about our health and well-being, and we cannot just let this recommendation stand. We would like you to understand that this tree has a huge impact on our lives. We urge you to reject this recommendation to deny our petition. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Gowanda. Now I'd like to call upon Mr. John Sutherland, speaking to item 7.2, petition response request, the traffic safety issues at the intersection of Kerferd Road, Montague Street and Herbert Street, Albert Park. Welcome, Mr. Sutherland.
Thank you very much for having me. Tonight I'd like to respond to the Council regarding the officer recommendations that have been put forward in agenda item 7.2, traffic safety issues at the intersection of Kerferd Road, Montague Street and Herbert Street in Albert Park. Though I have been a ratepayer in the City of Port Phillip for 10 years, this is the first time that I've been significantly moved by an issue that I felt it was my duty on behalf of residents to bring it to Council's attention. In doing this, I did not know what to expect. From this perspective, I would like to place on record the complete professionalism that I have been afforded by all City of Port Phillip staff that I've corresponded with. Rebecca Purvis and Emily Williams from the CEO's office explained in simple terms the process to have an agenda item included and how to join a meeting. I then met with Head of Major Transport Projects John Bartels and Senior Traffic Engineer Thomas Mason on site at the intersection and was immediately impressed by their understanding of the problem and the thought that they had given potential solutions. The recommendations that they have put forward tonight for Council consideration are highly commended by myself and other petitioners. Once implemented, they will alleviate all concerns raised in the petition and make Albert Park a safer place to live for all. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to bring this important issue to Council's attention, and I hope the officer recommendations can be implemented as soon as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to call upon Georgina Solidis, speaking to item 9.1, which is the acceptance of the Older Persons Consultative Annual Report 2019 and the extension of membership. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity for presenting. Firstly, I wanted to also acknowledge the passing of Leslie Gregg, who died on the 21st of June. Leslie was a founding member of the OPCC and continued as an active member until her death. She provided many insights about issues that affect older people within Port Phillip, including those living alone. I would like to formally thank who support the committee's work and the way this is done with diligence, patience and good humour. Laura Catapan and Sheridan Green's fantastic work has become even more apparent in these, what we refer to as times. The members of the committee have a range of experience and expertise, and it has been a pleasure working with this group of committed people, especially when I was chair for the last couple of years. I also wish to acknowledge Councillor Gross for his ongoing interest in and support of our work. His involvement illustrates that the Council takes consultations seriously. The annual report has been made available to you, and here I'd like to highlight only some of what was achieved in 2019. This year marks the committee's 20th anniversary. We began preparation to celebrate this event last year and worked we will type of event to what we originally imagined. It's an important milestone and one the Council should be proud of, as it represents a commitment to listening to a group of often vulnerable members of our community. Each January, the committee establishes its key objectives for the year. Most particularly, I'd like to highlight our aims to 1, be inclusive of all groups of older residents living in our diverse community, to consider how climate change is affecting older persons, monitor the physical environment so that it remains safe and comfortable for older people, and maintain governance structures that allow the OPCC's population to be effective. The OPCC strives to be responsive to the Council and the community. The committee was directly involved in a number of consultations related to Council business. These are listed in detail in the full report, but I'd nonetheless like to highlight just a few. We participated fully in the community bus review housing strategy, community safety, access and inclusion, Charter of Ages, care rights and quality standards, consultation on libraries, public spaces, parking, fishermen's bend and placemaking. These consultations have included site visits to Joy Street and a bus trip through Fir'D End. Instructive, and I think the support we received from staff has been incredible. In addition, the OPCC has responded to issues which have come to us through the wider community. These include parking during the Grand Prix and its impact on older residents, MSAC and the need for age-friendly facilities, climate change and its possible disproportionate impact on older residents, South Melbourne Market remaining age-friendly, exercise parks for older people, and the need for seating in Fitzroy Street and the fact that seating remains absent. The OPCC is guided in its work by Port Phillip Council policy as well as work.
Okay, I think we might have lost Miss. Oh, she's back again. Sorry, Miss Solitis, you were coming in and out. I think your internet reception is a little loose. Okay, we can't actually.
Shaking, is it?
Yeah, I don't think. I'll keep going. We can hear you again now.
Okay. The World Health Organisation's Age City Framework, friendly framework, guides our work, and the principles of best practice. We use those to make sure Port Phillip remains a friendly city. The committee has instigated engagement with other bodies, most Association of Victoria or the MAB, with the aim of reaching out to committees similar to our own. This work continues and means we can network across the state on issues of mutual interest. The OPCC is involved in running activities, and this was the case in 2019 with the following: hosting the Embolden Festival with an organisation called Celebrate Ageing, which was an overwhelming success. There were over 400 delegates and 61 presentations, with OPCC members actively involved as speakers and participants. The Senior Festival is one of our key priorities, and an OPCC subcommittee works alongside staff on the program. Last year, the After Dark element of the program was expanded so that a broader range of age groups would be involved, and there were some terrific events, including discos and Greek dancing and so on. There has also been a concerted effort to co-host events with ethnic minority groups. Over 60 events were organised with 4,500 people attending. The Council Grants Program funded more than 26 groups, community groups, to run some of these events. This ensures community ownership and therefore ongoing relevance of the festival. We look forward to this funding continuing as it ensures the senior festival remains inclusive. In conclusion, I would like to thank the Council for its ongoing commitment to community consultation. Ageing in Port Phillip needs to be a positive experience. This requires appropriate services and amenities. This cohort of residents is likely to increase quickly. After all, ageing is a universal experience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Solitis. Your submission will be put in full on the Council's website when the minutes go up. So some of it did go missing during your speech, but appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I call upon Paul Littman, speaking to item 13.1, Delegation to the CEO, Reactivation of Public Space to Support Community and Economic Recovery. Welcome, Mr. Littman.
Good evening to all and sundry. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to support this initiative and the ongoing availability for the CEO to speed through the process of trialling various things in the municipality. We had an experience, or we've had a number so far in the last 2 years, where it's been expeditious. Some have worked and some haven't, but the speed with which we've been able to do things has saved us a lot of time and money. So we, as an organisation, I think I speak on behalf of all the traders associations, really commend this and appeal to you to maintain it. I won't say any more other than to wish Peter a happy birthday.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lippman. And on that note, yes, it is our CEO's birthday today. Happy birthday, Peter. Now we'll call upon Jared Gray, speaking to item 12.1, which is the Planning Scheme Amendment C 741 Port, which is the extension of HO8 Tiuna Grove Elwood. Consideration of panel recommendation and adoption of amendment. Welcome, Mr. Gray.
Good evening. I'm a solicitor of Minter Allison and I speak on behalf of the owner of the properties at numbers 1, 3 and 5 Tiuna Grove. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. The reason that we requested to speak was really to have the opportunity to hear and respond to any matters that might have arisen from other submitters. I'm not sure if anyone else is going to speak, so we'll keep our submission brief. The submission that we wish to make is that there would be no basis upon which to make any changes to the amendment beyond the minor changes that have been recommended by the panel. So that would include matters such as including internal controls. That, for example, was a matter that the panel considered detailed submissions in relation to, and the panel found that would not be in any way justified. Now, our client doesn't wish to contest the panel's recommendations. Our client intends to proceed to develop its land in accordance with a planning permit that was granted by VCAT earlier this year. And relevantly, that permit was issued in circumstances where a heritage overlay already applied to part of our client's land. That's the heritage overlay that exists on an interim basis, and this amendment will make permanent. The council did support the grant of that permit. VCAT heard the case over 5 days and found that it would result in an acceptable planning outcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. So we've received a further 5 submissions, councillors, and they're going to be read out on behalf of the members of the public. I'll call the name of each member of the public and refer to the Coordinator of Governance to read a summary of the submissions. A copy of all statements will be published in full on Council's website tomorrow. First up, Mr. Adrian Jackson, please. General public question time.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Mr. Jackson's first submission reads, will the proposed palm trees outside the Palais hinder the view of the Palais and Luna Park and photo opportunity for tourists and new residents from the embankment near the tram line? Also, possums in palm trees were a concern for some councillors in nearby Catani Gardens in the past. Are we creating a further problem where a possum catcher will be used and ugly bits of tin placed around the tree trunks to stop or hinder these animals from climbing new palms? Will children be in tears as the possum is dragged from the palms by the catcher? Also, promoting crowds is a health problem currently and in the future too, as the coronavirus is here forever and is unlikely to be cured just like the flu every winter. Also, can the proposed cost to ratepayers be included in all council project promotions that appear on the website?
Thank you very much. Now I'll ask Mr. Johnson, please, if you could address part of that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll ask Council's Manager of Open Space and Recreation, Mr. Anthony Trail, to provide some information to Mr. Jackson's question.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Preservation of the view of the Palais Theatre and Luna Park is paramount and underpins the design process of this project. Heritage Victoria have been actively engaged throughout the design and are supportive of what we're doing. The palms have been chosen to specifically have height and not block those views. Council no longer uses a possum catcher, and the council and state cost towards this project can be included on our webpage for this particular project.
Thank you, Mr. Trail. Ms. D'Alessandro, did you want to speak to the illegal component of it?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I was speaking to the second question by Mr Jackson.
Oh, okay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Mr Jackson has submitted a second submission, which reads, last week state MPs were caught out using public servants for party political tasks. This resulted in the sacking of 3 state cabinet ministers by the Premier. Why is one Port Phillip Council staff member allegedly telling residents that they can't put a political issue poster on their front fences because of bogus heritage overlays claims and that a permit is required? In the 40 years I have lived in Port Phillip, I have not heard of such draconian and probably illegal interference in the democratic process. Before and during elections, posters appear on fences and shop windows promoting candidates and issues. The government and media would be interested in hearing about this dodgy, overbearing behaviour. Please explain.
Thank you. Ms D'Alessandro.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Council's Planning Compliance Unit were responding to a resident's complaint, and that was just about one particular sign. They investigated the matter and the sign did not fit into the exemption requirements contained in the planning scheme, and therefore the property owner was happy to remove the sign. As with all compliance issues, we take an educative approach when we deal with such signage matters. Officers are always happy to work with the property owner to advise them how such a sign can be compliant with the planning scheme. And in this particular important issue, such as this, it's given the complexity of the exemptions, that's why we work with them. We've since worked with this particular community group and the complainant to understand the exemption requirements of the planning scheme to enable them to erect the signage that is compliant with the exemption provisions of the planning scheme, and they don't require a planning permit. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Mr Johnson, did you have anything further to add to that one?
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor, I might just add that with regards to the signage, the length of time that the signage is able to be installed, as Mr Jackson points out, it's very common for election signage to put up in the lead up to an election. There are some, as Mr D'Alessandro has just outlined, there are some specific exemptions under the planning scheme that enable this to happen. With regards to the time frame, the exemption reads that the sign must not be displayed longer than 14 days after the event is held, or for a period of 3 months, whichever is sooner. So the maximum period the sign can be displayed is 3 months. So signage to be installed in the lead up to the election, if it complies with the exemption, must be installed no more than 3 months ahead of and must be removed within 14 days of the election.
Thank you, Mr Johnson. Now, Mr Mark Richardson, and he speaks in relation to 12.1, which is the Planning Scheme Amendment C 741 Port, which is the extension to H08 Tiuna Grove, Elwood.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Mark Richardson submits, I commend the officer's recommendation to adopt C174 Port, which will significantly retain significant streetscape elements of Tiuna Grove. It will be a surprise if any councillor is not willing to support the recommendation. Nevertheless, officers, councillors, residents and more broadly all ratepayers in the city have expended a great amount of money and time to achieve this outcome. In my view, Council's decision to not accelerate the planned heritage review for Elwood H08 risks further cost and effort until it is completed. I request councillors bring forward the planned completion date of the review. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, and 15.1, which is the notice of motion Councillor Gross is putting up, the amendment to C171 Port, St Kilda Marina. We have Trevor White.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Trevor White submits, my question is, whilst community consultation was encouraged during the planning phase for the redevelopment of the St Kilda Marina, given that the community's third-party rights have been removed, it is vital that community consultation continues during the development phase and prior to the new developer gaining the appropriate permits. This would be consistent with the Planning Panel's recommendation 2, which recommends such consultation. Will Council adopt the Planning Panel's recommendation in full as printed in their report?
Thank you. And we also have Mr. Holland, who's speaking or put in a submission on the same item.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Peter Holland's submission reads, I support Councillor Groth's motion that Council accept the independent panel's recommendation for the successful marina tenderer to consult with the community and provide a community engagement report as part of its development plan. The immediate neighbours and the general public want to be able to talk with the successful tenderer at an early stage so as to be able to have effective input into the planning for the new marina. This consultation should result in a superior development. For example, the current concept for a left turn in only and a left turn out only is unwieldy, necessitating U-turns somewhere along the beach road for boats towing trailer boats. Local input may be invaluable in working out a better traffic management arrangement to be part of the development plan. The independent panel's recommendation reflected the fact that third-party appeal rights have been removed and that while there has been significant consultation up to this point, there is a need for additional effective consultation in the next stage. The officer's argument that there is a problem with transparency with the independent panel's recommendation is far-fetched. The successful tenderer could consult with anybody in preparing its development plan on a selective and private basis. Therefore, the panel's requirement for a formal consultation process by the developer gives more transparency, not less. The expert panel knew that it was making a brave recommendation for community consultation by the tenderer to help in preparing its development plan. The panel spent substantial time in the hearings process considering this issue. The expert panel clearly believed that the Minister could accept its recommendation. Council should therefore support its recommendation for a superior consultation process. Council has traditionally prided itself on consulting with its community. I urge councillors to be bold spirits, not timorous souls. You should stand up for your community and adopt the independent panel's recommendation for effective community consultation on the St Kilda Marina.
Thank you. And that's the end of the community submissions. So we'll go to agenda item 5, which is councillor question time. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I'll start off. I wanted to ask about the Palais Theatre and Luna Park precinct. Sorry, I'll start again. I wanted to ask about the Palais Theatre and the Luna Park precinct revitalisation project, and wondered why there isn't any community consultation on this project.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the project is currently, some details of the project have been published on Council's website, making it available for the community to see what is proposed. With regards to the actual consultation process and why this approach has been adopted, I'll defer to Mr. Trail to provide some additional information.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as Mr. Johnson alluded, the project is primarily a hostile vehicle mitigation solution to our highest risk sites for concentrated gatherings of people. A lot of the design is ensuring that vehicles can't get into those particular spaces. In saying that, our webpage does provide opportunities for our community to make comment on this project, and we're happy to engage anyone with our community to understand their views on that. That is the reason we've been widely advertising this design and having details for people to contact Council.
Thank you. Mr. Trail, how does the community do that when there's no mechanism on have your say or anything? What is your advice around how they would communicate?
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have a dedicated web page on our website that gives all information on this project, including the visuals, drawings, designs and design rationale. On that web page, it has a contact email and contact number to contact Council.
Thank you very much. Councillor Pearl, you have a question.
Thanks very much, Mayor. 2 questions, in fact, but I'll just ask one and request later on. Can Council officers please provide an update on the public design for Albert Reserve as part of the Anzac Station precinct. When is the state government expected to provide residents with detailed plans?
Ms. Rosic?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'll invite John Bartels, the Head of Projects Services for Anzac Precinct, to answer that question.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we have been advised by Rail Projects Victoria and Cross Yarra Partnership, responsible for the design and construction of Anzac Station, that they intend to release the updated designs for Anzac Station for community comment later this year, and we've been advised it's late in 2020 at this stage. Once further information is available, we will share that both publicly and with councillors.
Thank you, Mr. Bartel. Councillor Pearl, did you want to ask your other question?
Thanks very much. My second question relates to Graham and Bay Street in Port Melbourne intersection there. There's been a number of people contacting, more than 10 in fact, in the past 24 hours, very concerned about this intersection. So due to the increased traffic and speed around the Graham and Bay Street intersection, particularly the behaviours being exhibited there, what efforts has Council made to adhere to the community call to reduce the speed limit from 60 to 40 in consultation, obviously, with big roads? Local residents are of the view that this speed reduction will increase safety along Graham Street and the intersection of Graham and Bay Street substantially, and only reduce the travel time on the full length of the distance by about 29 seconds is their estimate. So my question is of this notorious stretch of road and intersection, what has Council been doing in consultation with big roads to improve the safety to local residents in this area?
Ms. Rosic?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I will need to take that question on notice because I don't have the details on hand. I know there have been actions taken, but I'll provide that to councillors.
Thank you. I have another question as well I wanted to ask in relation to the football clubs, the sporting clubs returning in some ways to play and to train this week, next week and going forward. I'm wondering how we go about allowing them use of pavilions. I note in particular at Murphy's Reserve Pavilion, the community's itching to get into there and use the kitchen. However, there are community groups in there using it as part of the COVID response. Just wondering, what is the process in changeover?
Through you, Mayor, I can answer some of the question on J.R. Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan.
Thank you. So when the COVID crisis hit, one of the biggest issues we were faced with was the need for emergency food, and Port Phillip Community Group undertook that. The increase was so huge that they couldn't cope with their regular premises, and through discussions they went to J.R. Murphy. Just to put that in context, that organisation usually distributes $200,000 worth of food and essential items each year. Between April and today, they've distributed a total of $300,000 worth. So that's an indication of the increased demand. With that particular location, we have been working with both Port Phillip Community Group and the sporting group to enable use while they transition out. We're working with both of them to try and find alternative arrangements. But given the nature of the epidemic, it's not possible to simply vacate the premises at a week's notice without some alternative in place to provide food and essential items to residents. So we're working with both to allow joint access, which might not be ideal for either, but we're working with both groups to do that until a more permanent arrangement can be found. Is Miss McNeil online? She may be able to answer Mr. Trail might be able to answer the more general arrangement about transitional arrangements back for sporting clubs.
Miss McNeil's online.
Through you, Mayor. Yes, we're working.
You're very faint.
I'll turn it. Has that helped?
Yes, that's better.
Great. So we're working very closely with the teams involved to identify alternative accommodation for this important service, and also looking at options to maintain the service and start to phase the sports clubs in. It is a balancing act, though, looking at how we support reactivation of existing services as well as support the ongoing food services, which is obviously very important. But it's a work in progress at this stage. But we're looking to make sure that nothing gets dropped off as we work through transition.
Thank you, Ms McNeil. Councillor Crawford, you have a question?
Thank you, Mayor. I was hoping to take up Mr. Richardson's question. I thought that we were in process of undertaking the further heritage review into the Elwood and remaining sections of the municipality, and I wanted to clarify if that's going ahead, and that I think the time frame is probably is indicative of how long the process is, not that we're delaying it. Is that correct?
Ms Rosick.
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor, I had a bit of a reception problem. Do you mind repeating the question?
Yes, sure. Ms Rosick, I was just wondering, Mr Richardson mentioned that Council was delaying the outcome of the remainder of the Elwood Heritage Review and the remaining parts of the municipality. My understanding is that we are going ahead with it, and that these processes take a lot of time, and that's what is not the problem, but it will take a period of time to go through. And I just wanted to clarify that.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, I can. We have a heritage program for the municipality where we're undertaking planning amendments. HO8 for Elwood is included in the draft council budget endorsed for community consultation last week. So it's the next one on the list.
And could I just ask a follow-up question? And usually the process for those amendments take how long, roughly?
Through you, Madam Mayor, they can vary. They can take approximately 1 to 2 years, depending on the feedback we get from the community and the panel process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Rosick. Any other questions, councillors? If not, we'll move to item 6, okay, which is the sealing schedule, and there are no items requiring sealing tonight. We'll move to item 7, which is petitions and joint letters. And councillors, we have 2 petitions on tonight's agenda. The first up is 7.1, which is a petition response, the request for removal of the tree in Wordsworth Street, St Kilda. We did have a speaker earlier on. Are there any questions of the officers in relation to this report? Councillor Crawford.
I would like to ask 2 questions, if I may, Madam Mayor. One is, how often would we be trimming the tree if the recommendation is accepted in order to limit the fall into the property? And is there also an appeals process for the people putting in the petition, depending on which way the recommendation is accepted or not?
Okay, so we've got, Mr Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. I will ask Council's Coordinator of Park Services, Mr. Mark Fusco, to provide an answer to Councillor Crawford's questions.
For you, Madam Mayor. That could be upon request for pruning.
You're very faint, Mr. Fusco. If you could speak up a little, that'd be great.
I've just replugged my headphones in.
Hopefully there we go.
Okay. For you, Madam Mayor. The pruning request could be put in at any stage. We will prune the tree overhanging the resident's property. It can be based on their request, or we could potentially put it in as a work order ongoing. And is there an appeal process similar to what's currently happening? Potentially in future, it could be appealed to the manager, and the manager can make a decision, or it could go back through petition.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might just add that we have considered the submission from the residents as the request to the tree removal committee. We have then considered this petition as being an appeal of that decision of the committee to retain the tree. So under Council's policies, the process for appeal, as Mr. Fusco outlined, is an appeal to the Manager of Open Space and Recreation or through to Council, as the residents have done now.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. So if the officer's recommendation is upheld, can I ask Mr. Fusco to get in contact, please, with the resident around pruning the tree?
For you, Madam Mayor, yes, we will. We'll contact the resident and discuss the level of pruning that will be undertaken and when it's likely to happen.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Councillor Crawford?
Could sorry, possibly this question is for Mr. Fusco. I guess I don't know that particular street or tree that we're referring to. I guess I'm wondering how much are we going to have to prune it back in order to stop the various spores and everything going into the yard? Is it like a lot? Is it just a little bit? I mean, is it going to look worse than the trees that have the electricity lines going through them? I guess I'm trying to understand the extent of what we really have to prune in order to achieve a good outcome for the resident. Please.
For you, Madam Mayor, yes, it will unbalance a tree canopy. These trees do respond well to pruning. The level of material that will be reduced, it will reduce like the overhang that comes over the property and falls within the property boundary, as the petitioner refers to. The slight winds can cause the particles to fall further into the courtyard. It's quite common for these trees to be pruned this way, and it won't be impacted too much. So, yeah, it will respond well to the pruning, and we've done it quite often.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? So we have an officer's recommendation, councillors. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Pearl to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Bond to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to the motion?
I'll resume my right. That's right.
Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thanks.
Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Copsey.
Sorry, just battling with tech. I just wanted to thank the residents who have been in touch regarding this. It's obviously an ongoing issue. I'm hopeful that some of the suggestions made by officers will help to mitigate some of the issues that are being experienced here. I'll be supporting the officer's recommendation this evening because they have acted in accordance with policy, and I'm hopeful that we can continue to engage here and have a better outcome. Yeah, but I understand the reasoning the officers have put forward. It is a healthy tree. We have strong canopy cover targets here in Port Phillip, and I'm hopeful that the actions that have been put forward by officers will help to reduce some of the impacts that the residents are reporting here.
Thank you, Councillor Copsey. Would anyone else like to speak? Councillor Brand?
Thank you. Look, I find this quite difficult, and I really, I haven't had an opportunity to go and have a look at the tree, and I certainly understand the need to hold the integrity of our tree planting policy. I'm actually going to vote against it because I just feel that this may well be a justifiable moment for removing the tree, but I can't say for sure because I just don't know quite enough about it as much as I would like to. But I feel if I have to decide one way or another, I feel that this may be an opportunity, maybe a moment where we should be doing that. So for what it's worth, I'm going to vote against it because it just doesn't sound like a suitable tree to be there. And the longer we allow it to keep on growing, the more it'll continue to be a problem. So I know that's to some degree endangering our tree policy, and it's very hard to balance those up with the needs of individual people. But I'm going that way tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. I'll speak next. I do not like this tree, I have to say it. It was a very popular tree to be planted many years ago. We call it the cowitch tree. My kids call it the spider bomb tree. It is quite a pretty tree when it's in flower. It's got beautiful pink flowers and they tend to grow very tall and quite upward. However, you know, allergies in our municipality are very, very high in relation to not just this tree, but many other trees. So if we were to take out all the trees that our community have allergies to, there'd be probably not very many trees left. So, you know, we do need to balance the issues around what trees are planted and people's health concerns. So I feel like I don't want to support the officer's recommendation in this instance because I do understand the residents' concerns. However, our policy is pretty strong and robust for this particular reason. We get a lot of people requesting trees to be removed for various reasons. So in this case, I will be voting for the officer's recommendation. Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Thanks very much, Mayor. Hopefully you can hear us a little bit clearer as well. We had some good help.
Much better.
They were putting us through the microphone on the roof here at the Kilda Town Hall, which is very high. So thanks to those guys for sorting it out. The reason I'm on council to a large degree is because of the dispute I had over a tree in a backyard. So something I take very seriously in terms of the council's role and responsibility. I think the tree probably should be removed, but I think the policy needs to be bended or amended and updated to account for the change. This species type has a track record of causing a lot of grief, particularly down in the Port and South Melbourne end of the municipality. Again, I think if we remove one tree, we're identifying potentially a systemic policy issue that probably needs to be addressed. The greening Port Phillip strategy is a good strategy and it has ambitious targets that probably aren't going to be met based on the attrition rate of trees in the municipality versus the planting rate. But it's not perfect. And the thing with trees are that they last much longer than most of us will. And we put lots of time and effort into planning approvals, but we really don't put any effort as council into the exact location of where these very large structures go, particularly native trees, which, eucalypts, which I think is the best tree of all, but hardwood species cause, a big risk to council as well. So what I'm saying is I think the policy needs to be updated as the trees start to grow and problems start to emerge. So I'd be supportive of doing a review of the policy to see if this species of tree is appropriate and whether or not there's a number of trees in the municipality that need to be removed. I don't think it would be a smart idea for council to opine on a single tree in the municipality. That's what our offices are for. So happy to support this, but also maybe through a notice of motion, etc. In the future, I'm not proposing to put one up anytime soon, but maybe the next time the greening Port Phillip strategy comes in, we also need to have a look at tree removal and how we can replace them with more appropriate trees in those locations. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Now, I'll put that motion under division and call upon each councillor for your vote. First up, Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic. Councillor Voss, 4. Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
Councillor Brand.
Against.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
Councillor Crawford.
Abstain.
Councillor Gross.
Abstain.
That motion is carried. All right, we'll move on to 7.2, petition response, traffic safety issues at the intersection of Kerferd Road, Montague Street and Herbert Street, Albert Park. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to this report? There are none. So we have an officer's recommendation. Would someone like to move this or something different? Councillor Bond to move, Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to the motion?
Only to thank the residents who spent their time going round and obtaining signatures from their neighbours and came to us with a proposal to make this particular intersection a bit more safer. I spoke to one of the residents in that particular area this afternoon. They are grateful that Council has taken such swift action and responded to their petition, and we accept that there will be some permanent changes coming as part of the Shrine to Sea project whenever that makes its way to Kerferd Road. But in the meantime, they're more than happy with the interim temporary measures Council is going to put in place to hopefully make that particular intersection safer and calm the traffic as it comes from Montague across Kerferd Road and into Herbert Street and vice versa. So I think it's a very good outcome for the residents involved, and Council's only too happy to help if you're all at home watching this on the Council live stream.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Copsey.
Yep, just also to thank the community members who have put great thought and effort into bringing this petition. It's a bit of a notorious intersection, and I am very hopeful that this will result in a better place for people walking, biking. It's actually got a lot of beautiful open space available spots, so anything that we can do to make that more accessible and less dangerous due to the speeds that we sometimes see drivers taking through this area is really great. Thank you very much for working with Council to bring about this outcome.
Thank you. Councillor Pearl.
Happy to support this also, but I'd also like to see the safety improvements on this strip of road go further by Council reducing the speed limit on this road from 60 to 50. We're constantly told that that's not an effective mechanism, but I disagree respectively and think we should be dropping the speed limit to complement these features to make that road safer. It's a very historic strip. Vegemite was invented on Kerferd Road, if I've got my history correct. I can't exactly remember where it is. And the tram track and also the military links of that, the whole reason that road is there is the military links and the links to Victoria Barracks, obviously. So it's a very key part and little known part of the city's history that needs to be respected and maintained intact. but there's safety issues there which this council has considered in the past. Shrine to the Sea, we were all very optimistic about when it first came out. We asked officers to delay a process to improve safety along Kerferd Road for a short period of time to find out what those initiatives from the state government were exactly.
Please speak to the motion, Councillor Pearl.
Not aware of what they plans for that are, so this intersection should have been fixed as part of that process. It hasn't been, so hopefully these temporary measures work, but ultimately I think the real solution here is to drop the speed limit from 60 to 50, and it's a key thing we should get on and do. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Are there anyone else wanting to speak to this item? Councillor Bond, did you want to close?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor.
All right, then we'll put that motion again under division. I'll call each councillor's name. First up is Councillor Simic. Can you please say again?
4, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Voss, 4. Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
Councillor Brand.
4.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
Councillor Crawford.
4.
Councillor Gross.
4.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
That motion is unanimously carried. All right, now we'll move to the presentation of reports. And councillors, the first one is 8.1, the CEO report, issue 66. Are there any questions of the officers, councillors? Councillor Gross.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. This is a question for the CEO about the comprehensive income statement on page 25. Sorry, I'll just get it. When the corona crisis started, the forecasts were for future income were pretty pessimistic and parlous. But as I look to this comprehensive income statement, it's actually not too bad. And I wanted to ask the CEO if he shared my assessment that it's actually not too bad. And given the social and economic dislocation that the world and this council have suffered, why does he think it's done so well?
Mr. CEO.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Gross. Through you, Madam Mayor, I might ask Mr. Carroll to talk a little bit more detail. I guess our original projections were based on a longer period of lockdown. I think Australia has done very well generally in controlling the pandemic, and therefore we had revised projections, and we've seen some income come back higher than forecasted again as Melbourne struggles with additional set of infections. We've now got over a dozen suburbs going back to stage 3 restrictions. I don't think we're out of the woods yet. In terms of the expense side, quite clearly in the front of the CEO report, we've outlined a number of initiatives that we've undertaken to wind back employee costs, discretionary spending, materials and services, all of which are helping to limit the deficit. And as I've flagged in the front of the CEO report, we're very close to landing some operating model changes which will take some further costs out of our management overheads. But I might ask Mr. Carroll, through you, Mayor, if he wishes to add any further commentary.
Through you, Mayor, that's right. We were initially forecasting, in a what we thought of being a much longer period of lockdown, around a $20 million deficit this financial year. Currently forecasting that that'll be around the 12.8 million, and it's improved slightly from it's improved materially from last month. largely off the back of improved parking revenues with greater utilisation now that the restrictions have been lifted. We've worked really hard to balance the budget as best we can. We won't balance, but we're not forecasting that we will balance the budget. Initially, the budget was for a small surplus, around 500,000 for this year. We're currently forecasting that we'll probably be coming in around 2.6 million deficit, which is better than we initially thought a month or so ago. There are still some risks with our budget this year and also, well, over the past month or so, and we're doing a further review at year end now, leading into the finalisation of the budget for next year. We've worked hard in finding operating savings during this last 3 months of the year. We've also worked to reduce some of our capital expenditure. A large portion of that is deferred into next year, and we will catch up over the next couple of years. So it's not we will make sure that we continue to look after our assets. We have tried to manage that cash impact and reduce the deficit through reducing our capital program over the last 3 months as well.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Councillor Crawford, you have a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I was hoping to ask in regards to on the CEO's report, which is page 22, it talks about total recordable injury frequency rate below 21.8, but we obviously are higher. But then in the notes below, it says that in May, we had 4 injuries in the month of May. My question is this, what is considered under that criteria of injuries? Like, is it 4 injuries of just minor injuries, like, I don't know, hammering your thumb, or is it a much more serious? So what is captured under that data, and is it something that we need to be adjusting some of our systems to?
Thank you. Ms. Bennett?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the total recordable injury rate is one of a number of measures that we use to track and make amendments in terms of the way we manage the health and safety of our people, and that's monitored by the executive on a monthly basis and is also reported to the audit committee regularly as well. In terms of the total recordable injury rate, it's quite a volatile measure, where just one incident where medical treatment might have been required, or changes to the total number of hours worked across the entire organisation, can make a difference to results. I'd add that a low result for this metric is not necessarily good, because this indicator doesn't talk to the severity of incidents. So it's important to consider this alongside other measures. Certainly, we've got a very strong commitment to improving our approach to occupational health and safety at the City of Port Phillip, and we're in the process of putting in place a health and safety management system, and that contains a range of safety policies and procedures, and we're also working very hard to build a safety culture through safety shares and toolbox talks at meetings and the like, as well as encouraging a culture of reporting hazards and near misses so that we can learn from them. With respect to the 4 incidents that occurred in May, I'm advised that in general or broad terms, they involved a trip, and that trip required first aid. There was a significant strain, which resulted in a lost time injury. There was a slip and fall where medical treatment was required, and there was a vehicle accident where there was a lost time injury. Of those 4 particular incidents, one incident was classed as more severe. However, I've been advised, and I'm very pleased to report, that the person involved is making a good recovery. And given the severity of the particular incident, it was investigated by our health and safety team to understand the issues and key learnings. So it is a heavy focus of the organisation.
Thank you.
Good question, Councillor Crawford. Did you have another one, or was that it? Councillor Simic.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And I'm looking at under Direction 1, the In Our Backyard strategy, and this is, I think, the first time that I've seen that this has been listed in CEO report as at risk instead of off track, which I am incredibly happy about. That we're moving in a more positive direction in that space, particularly at a time when it's really needed. My question is, the projects that have been listed, what the delivery timeline for those looks like, and when we're likely to see them come to fruition.
Mr. Keenan.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor. Thanks, Councillor Simic. The projects that are listed, we're not actually delivering them, so we have limited control, but in that they're being delivered by our local community housing providers. But we would be hopeful that they would be delivered over the next 18 months, 2 years. The Balaclava one is still awaiting further announcement, but one of the requirements from government is that they are able to be up and running pretty quickly. So I can contact the providers and get a more specific timeline.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Keenan. Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much. My question's along the similar lines of Councillor Gross, referring to page 25, where we talk about for this financial year, a cash deficit of 2.6 million versus a surplus of 430,000. With only a small amount of time to go, based on the performance of where we're tracking on the actual numbers, I'll take your expert opinion because we'll find out soon enough. But I would have thought that we're in a reasonable chance of getting a surplus across the line. So my first question is how accurate is the 2.6 million cash deficit amount, and what's the probability of it actually falling into surplus based on the trends we're seeing, and what's the updated deficit amount for next financial year versus what we put out in the budget?
Mr. Carroll, or?
Yeah, through you, Mayor. Look, that forecast was done at the end of the May period, so with 1 month to go in the year, and it was based on the best information available at the time. I haven't checked the figures over the past. We've been in the middle of doing a new transition to a new finance system, so I haven't looked at the financial performance in the past couple of weeks. But I'd suggest that we may do a little bit better than that, but I don't think it would tip over into surplus for this year, but the deficit may not be as high. What we are doing in terms of next year, we did forecast that there'd be around, I think it was a $5 million surplus, but the cumulative result would be around $1 million over the 2 years, because initially we were forecasting a $4 million deficit from memory for this year, which would then be balanced by $5 million surplus for next year, which would leave $1 million cumulative result over the 2 years, which provided some contingency. We are doing a full review, as we always do, during the draft, where we've got the draft budget out for consultation, and we'll report back at that period of time before we finalise the budget on the revised forecast, including our forecast of what the year-end result is for this year, and better information around our projects and financial position for next financial year at that time. So I don't have an update for you at the moment, councillors, but we are tracking a bit better than initially thought.
Terrific. Thank you, Mr. Carroll. I have a question probably to the CEO in relation to Fisherman's Bend. I note in the report at the beginning it talks about the Montague precinct plans being imminently released. I'm just wondering if the CEO could update us on the timelines for that, please.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor. There's been a recent shuffle in the ministry where Minister Kilda, who's a very experienced member of the Labor government, has picked up what the government is calling the business precincts portfolio, which includes the portfolios, the business precincts of Docklands, Fisherman's Bend, Footscray, as opposed to the other priority precincts, which are being labelled by the government as transport precincts, which have been picked up by Minister Allen as Minister for Transport and Infrastructure. They include the precincts of Arden, Macaulay, Sunshine and Richmond to Flinders Street corridor. I was speaking to the head of the Fishermen's and Task Force about this in the last couple of days. She advises me that the Montague precinct plan is unlikely to be released as proposed in July, and may indeed be released later in the year, indeed after the council election. But that will be subject to them briefing Minister Kilda. So there is a need to brief the new minister on the portfolios. That's delayed the Montague precinct plan, but we're working very closely with the Fishermen's Bend Task Force, and we are also seeking an urgent meeting with Mr. Kilda to ensure that our community is well engaged in the Montague precinct plan when it's released, and that's not done in caretaker period when community without sort of full representation of the councillors or indeed in the middle of an election, so that community have councillors there to represent their views and engagement on the Montague. So the CEO report was up to date at the time of publication, and with the shuffle and the change in focus on precincts, that release of the precinct plan to Montague is now likely to be delayed. But we'll pursue a meeting with Mr. Kilda as quickly as possible.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Any further questions, councillors? Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for this or something other? Councillor Gross to move. Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Baxter to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, I just want to say that this report is an important document for us. I know this is a cliche and a platitude that I trot out every time I'm honoured to move the acceptance of this report, but platitudes are my strength. The other thing I wanted to say was in speaking of platitudes and cliches is that this is a historic document in a sense for our local community because we're in historically tumultuous times. And so that's why it's an important document. And that's why I found the comprehensive income statement on page 25 so interesting because I think our officers have done really well. So much has changed. The initial intelligence was terrifying in terms of the sort of losses that we were facing, but a council budget is a big and complex thing, and yes, we have had dramatic losses in some forms of revenue, but because it's a big and complicated document, we've been able to claw back income in other cases. So if history was to judge this CEO's report, I think it would say in a time of great upheaval and tumult, this council, helped and assisted by its financial officers, has actually navigated a fairly calm waters, and I'm really proud of them. And I think this is an important report, and I think we've done pretty well. I don't want to appear arrogant and smug, but it could have been very ugly, and it's much less ugly than I imagined. So well done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Baxter.
Look, I couldn't add a whole lot more than what Councillor Gross said, so just agree with that.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the CEO report motion? If not, I'll put that motion again under division. Councillor Voss, 4. Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Yeah, that's frozen.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
In favour.
Councillor Simic. That motion is unanimously carried. Okay, so the next one up is 9.1, which is the acceptance of the Older Persons Consultative Committee Annual Report 2019 and extension of membership. And we did hear from Georgina Solitis earlier. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? There are none. So do we have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a seconder? And Councillor Brand to second. Thank you. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
Look, I'll say a few things. My honour to serve on this on behalf of the council. This particular committee in the past year has been really brilliantly led by Georgina Solitis. You could tell from the calibre of her presentation, compromised as it was by IT issues, was of the highest calibre, and that meant that she could lead this committee into places where we wanted and needed to go. It's a place where we've dealt with a number of issues, recurring issues, footpaths, and I say to everyone, officers and councillors, footpaths are so important to everyone, but particularly older persons. Our toilet strategy is one that's constantly being asked and nagged about. And when our capital works budget settles down after we recover from the COVID crisis, you know, that's an issue that I would like to take up on behalf of the OPCC. But there are many other issues that this vibrant committee has interested itself with, which are in the annual report. So I commend it to anyone who wants to read about how older people, particularly the vital older people on our OPCC, think what this community and what this council should be doing for older people and everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Gross. Councillor Brand.
Yes, I had my birthday the other day, and to my eternal shock, I think I'm very rapidly qualifying to be termed an older person, and I...
6 years too late. 6 years too late.
Oh, gee. Oh, it's all right. I'm there. I think I have some perspective on it anyway. But it is really important that we harness, as we say in our fundamental policies, is that we harness the expertise of our community, and a committee like this takes a very particular expertise. It's the expertise of long experience, and it seems to be a committee full of really intelligent, publicly minded people of long experience, and it's it seems to be functioning really well, and it's great that it is, and so thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? I'll also quickly speak to this motion, and I had the pleasure in September 2009. It was a really key moment for me when I presented Fisherman's Bend and everything about Fisherman's Bend to the OPCC. And as a result of that presentation, they were very keen to do a tour of Fisherman's Bend. So in October 2019, off we went in a bus and did a bit of a tour around Fisherman's Bend to really see the challenges and the opportunities firsthand. It was unbelievably insightful to understand their responses and the reactions to the conversations that I had with them about ageing in place, about the design of buildings, door sizes, seating, transport, affordable and social housing. The list went on. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to the OPCC, because so many of the reports and the things that we consider in council also brings in your voice, and I think it's really important. So not just from the conversations you have, but also from Councillor Gross, who I'd like to thank him for his time serving on that committee. It is very valuable. So just in relation to Fisherman's Bend, we did leave that tour with a promise to hold another one. So I'd like to take them up on that again someday when it's safe to do so. Thank you. All right, Councillor Gross, you don't need to close. There was no debate. So then I'll put that motion again under division. First up, Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
Councillor Brand.
4.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
Councillor Crawford.
4.
Councillor Gross.
4.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic. Say it once more, please, Councillor Simic.
4.
Thank you. I heard you that time. Councillor Voss, 4. That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Item 12.1 is next. The Planning Scheme Amendment, C174 Port, which is the extension to H08 Tiuna Grove, Elwood. Consideration of panel recommendation and the adoption of amendment. And we heard from some speakers earlier on, councillors. Do you have any questions of the officers? Anyone like to take up any questions that was outlined earlier?
Yes. Hold on.
All right, Councillor Brand.
I'm sorry, I just couldn't find my chat
All right,
button.
Councillor Bonds first.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. About a few months back, I met some residents of that Tiuna Grove area, and they had concerns about some of the height limits in that particular area that they believed were incorrect, which had reflected on the heritage overlay of that particular area. Have we revisited any of the concerns of those residents regarding the height of buildings in that area? And they took me around and pointed out a couple to me that were clearly, there was a discrepancy between council's information and the actual height of the building. So have we revisited that as part of this heritage overlay?
Okay, Ms. Rosick.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I'd like to refer this question to Kelly White, the Head of Planning Policy.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the heights in that area are applied through the residential zone. And so to review that, we'll need to review Council's housing strategy would be the correct vehicle. We do have... Sorry, there is an item in Council's endorsed budget for 2020-21 to commence work on reviewing the housing strategy.
Councillor Bond, does that answer your question?
Not really. I understand we're going to do it down the track, but the concerns the residents raised with me were specific to this particular area of Tiuna Grove, where they believe that the heights council was using for various buildings in this area were incorrect, and they would like them investigated and corrected. So I'm just surprised that we've reviewed the heritage of this particular area without actually going back and doing that particular bit of work.
Through you, Madam Mayor.
Yes,
just to add a bit more information, this planning scheme amendment was not looking at height as part of the whole precinct. It was just focusing on certain properties in Tiuna Grove. So I can take that on notice and have a look. I'm not aware of any issues with height, but I will have a look at that and provide a response to council.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rosick. Okay, we've got a question from Councillor Brand.
Yes, thank you. I'm just madly trying to trawl through the report to find exactly what I'm referring to, but I think it might be 21 to 23 Tiuna, but it's a relatively modern building that there's some discussion in the panel report and in this report about whether it should or should not be in the included in this current amendment to HO8. Could you just explain a little bit about it? There was a comment, I think it was in a panel comment, to say this is not about the architectural quality of the building. It's about its difference from the character, the established character of the area. I'd just be interested in understanding the officer's position on this particular building.
Thank you, Ms. Rosick.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that was picked up by the panel, and I'd like to invite Ms. Kelly White to provide further details.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So 21 to 23 Tiuna Grove was proposed to be removed from the amendment because it was a contemporary development. So the discussion in the panel report talks about that it was removed on that basis, that at the moment it doesn't necessarily meet the significance of the precinct that has been established. So it wasn't necessarily to say that it has no significance, but it was to say that it doesn't necessarily align with what's currently significant about the HO8 precinct. So the panel has recommended that in our review of HO8, that we consider whether we might look to include 1960s buildings like this one.
Good, thank you very much. I look forward to that.
Thank you, Ms. White. Councillor Crawford.
My question was the issue raised by Councillor Bond around height. Would that be considered under the HO8 that we are undertaking in the new year? That's new financial year, or is that just on heritage?
Thank you, Ms. Rosick.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the focus is on heritage. I'll invite Ms. Kelly White once again to provide further details of how the planning scheme amendment is undertaken and the focus.
Through you, Madam Mayor. So the review of HO8 would be focusing on the heritage controls. So it'll be an assessment of the HO8 area with a view to applying heritage controls in that area. The heights in that area are applied through the residential zones. So in order to review those heights, we would need to do that through a review of Council's housing strategy, which would be looking to review the residential zones.
Okay, so I can see there's no further questions. Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? So Councillor Copsey to move. Do I have a seconder? And Councillor Brand to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, thank you. Just to say again, as this comes up time and time again through this long and arduous process where we have to check it off each time and look at any improvements or whatever has been have been made to it, I feel very, very happy about this amendment. It started off as I thought an almost lost cause when the alarm was first raised, and the residents in the area put up such an incredible fight for it, and it's come through, and I think it's been an amazingly good process with some disagreements amongst us occasionally here and there, but on the whole, a really, really a great outcome for Elwood and a great outcome for the city of Port Phillip to to prove that it actually is possible to get interim heritage control that works and that that can be carried through to this point. So thank you to everybody involved on all sides, from the residents to the officers. It's good to see this coming on, and I really do look forward to the wider heritage review of HO8 as it comes on as quickly as possible, even though it's as slow as a snail. It's just a huge, massive task, and it covers so many different more aspects than this particular one, which has been, relatively speaking, nimble. It's only taken a couple of years, I guess, or maybe only 1 year. I can't even remember how long it was, but congratulations and thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Gross, you want to speak to the motion?
Oh, I just wanted to say this was people power personified. There was an anomaly in HOA which needed to be addressed, and the community rallied around and did an extraordinary job. And, you know, there are many institutional forces which mitigate against the success of an interim heritage protection. And the fact that this got over the line, as David said, it's not a miracle, but it's really excellent, and it is testimony to the vociferous neighbours and well-argued neighbours who did such a great job. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Gross. Councillor Crawford.
One of the great things about living in the city of Port Phillip is the amount of heritage that we have. It is interspersed with lots of modern buildings as well, but part of the reason that we live here, and I live particularly in Elwood, is I fell in love with the beauty of the architecture. So I am really glad that this has had a good outcome for these buildings. But again, I want to echo what the previous councillors have said. Thank you for our community for fighting so hard and bringing it to us. I'm looking forward to the future reviews so we can capture those things that got missed the first time round a long time ago. Was it 20 years? But yeah, thank you very much. This is your victory, not really ours, yours. So thank you very much for all your time and energy that went into this.
Thanks, Councillor Crawford. Councillor Baxter.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Look, yeah, like Councillor Crawford and Councillor Gross have said, I think that certain sections of the community will be able to look back at this as a significant win. You don't often get these sorts of wins, and I think it should be celebrated. There is something very special about not just Elwood in general, but I think that particular pocket of Elwood, sort of up on the hill down towards the beach, is very special. And yeah, I'm quite glad. I wasn't sure we were going to get this sort of outcome personally, but I'm very glad that we did. And it's a credit to those people that kicked up a big fuss about it, rather than just let the sort of inevitable inertia wash over them. They fought back, and I think that was really good.
Terrific. So, Councillor Copsey, would you like to close? Then, councillors, I will now move that motion under division and call upon each councillor by name. Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brand.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford.
For.
Councillor Gross.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic.
For.
Councillor Voss. For. Councillor Baxter.
For.
That motion is unanimously carried. Well done. Now, item 13.1 is the delegation to the CEO, placemaking activities and reactivation of public space. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I have a question, and I just wanted to ask about the reason for the locations being limited to only some of the high streets and not all. Ms Bennett?
Through you, Madam Mayor, officers considered a range of things in putting forward the proposal that's before Council tonight for consideration. We looked at the size of the area and the relative likelihood that businesses or members of the community might want to trial a different way of using public space. We also gave consideration to feedback that we've received through some of the various engagements that we've done through this period. The other thing officers considered was the ability to be able to respond to any requests that that may come through from the community. Obviously, the broader in scope that we make this, the more that people can participate, but also we wanted to make sure that we're able to respond and respond well within the resources that we have available to us. There may be some consideration that councillors may wish to give in terms of giving a little more flexibility to respond to requests from the community that might come in without the need to come back to council, and that may be something councillors wish to consider.
Thank you, Ms Bennett. Any further questions, councillors? Is that a question, Councillor Crawford, or not? No. Then we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Crawford, you would like to move an alternative recommendation motion?
Yes, please, Madam Mayor. I'm just getting it up now. So I'm just trying to find out, sorry, I might need to seek advice from Ms Pearce around where exactly this goes in it. Sorry, I'm going between two screens.
3.11.
3.11, that's it. That's the one. Would you like me to read that out for you?
Please read it. We'll see if we've got a seconder.
Yep, the Council delegates to the CEO the ability to define and add additional activity precincts to the public space activation program at community request, following consideration of Council resources to support activity in these areas. This delegation is in place until the 31st of March 2021, and the CEO will consult with councillors as part of considering community requests of this nature, and will provide an update through the CEO report if this delegation is utilised.
Do we have a seconder? I'm happy to second that. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I just wanted to include, like, at this time where we're giving delegation to the CEO to be a bit more flexible and for our community to respond to ideas for our various activity centres. It's a slow process if it has to come back to councillors at every opportunity, and we have seen this happen in the last 2 years in our placemaking program, and I just think it would be great if community areas have ideas that all could be considered under this delegation.
Thank you, Councillor Crawford. Would anyone else like to speak to this motion? Councillor Bond, you would like to make a amendment?
Yeah, I'd like to move an amendment, and I guess it would be 3.12, that council writes to existing footpath trading permit holders and advises them that we will be waiving their fees for next year.
Okay, just... All right. So say again.
That council writes to existing footpath trading holders advising them of council's position on their fees for next year. Footpath trading permit holders. Advising of council's position for next year, or I guess it's now this year. advising them of opportunities to increase their footpath trading areas, and advising them of the Victorian Liquor Licensing Gaming Commission. I think it's VLLG.
Let me Google that for you.
Yeah. The Victorian Liquor Licensing Gaming Commission's waiver of temporary license fees for red line extensions. VCGLR, I believe it is.
Okay. Does that look right to you? What's up there, Councillor Bond?
All right,
It's Victorian. Sorry, yeah. Just read that.
Don't worry about the spelling so much. Just get the.
It's Victorian Commission for Gambling with Regulation.
That's right.
We'll get the right words for that too. All right.
Yeah, that's the, I guess, the gist of what it is I'd like Council to do.
Okay.
Commission for Gambling.
All right. So what we'll do is I'll ask for a seconder, and then I know there's a couple of was a clarifying question from Councillor Brand. Do I have a seconder for that?
Sorry, through you, Madam Mayor.
Yes, Councillor, Mr. CEO.
Sorry, just in terms of Councillor Bond's amendment, can I just clarify, Mr. Carroll, that we haven't approved that full exemption of the fees for next year yet? It's in the draft budget, so it's still subject to approval. So I think if Councillor Bond were to include the words councillor rights to existing footpath trading permits to advise them of council's intent to do that, we could do that, or to do that as soon as the draft budget's passed.
Or we could do it once the budget's passed.
Yes, correct.
Yeah.
Can we hear from Mr. Carroll?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that is my understanding. I don't think we pulled it out as a separate decision to do that early. So I do think it is subject to the it's in the draft budget, and it's subject to the draft budget being finalised. Which at this stage is mid-August.
Okay, so we need to put some words in there. Councillor Bond, did you want to advise where you want them to put subject to?
Yeah, somewhere in there put subject to Council's budget position. Advising them of Council's budget position once the budget's adopted or something like that.
Subject to Council's budget adoption.
Correct.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, you happy with that?
Yes, I think that covers the gist of what it is I'm trying to achieve here.
Okay. I need a seconder.
You've got. I've put second in.
You want a second, but you don't want a second until you've clarified.
Well, it has actually been clarified.
Okay.
Because
right.
that's what I was concerned about.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. So you don't need to ask a question now.
Mm-hmm.
All right then. So we've got a seconder in Councillor Brand. Councillor Bond, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yes, I just thought instead of, I think it's this time of year, we normally send out our footpath trading renewal fees. Everyone with footpath trading out the front of their business gets a bill from council saying you need to pay this much for the next 6 months or the next 12 months. I believe we've got a budget position where we're proposing to not charge people for their footpath trading this year. This item specifically, the additional delegations to the CEO, gives the CEO the right to increase footpath trading areas where he believes that could occur. And we found out, it was last night at the Fitzroy Street reference group, placemaking reference group, that the VCGLR, the Victorian Commission for Gambling and Liquor Regulation, has decided to waive temporary licence fees for any temporary alcohol permits for red line extensions, which could coincide with the additional footpath trading areas we're giving our traders. So I thought if we could bundle all that up into one letter, and instead of getting a bill, they can get some information on an opportunity for them to enhance their outdoor footpath trading areas by taking advantage of Council's position on extended footpath trading and the VCGLR's position on temporary licence fees and temporary red line extensions. So I just thought it'd be pleasant if our businesses received one of those from us instead of a bill.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the amendment?
Yes, look, this is a minor amendment about a communications of about a larger motion, which is the important part. But I think this is just the opportunity to package it together and to do it well, and to I guess just make it clear that this is a good little coming together of the sorts of things that Council can do, which it really should do, and it's something which we can do well, and I just agree it's a very good idea.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak to the amendment? If not, I'll put the amendment under division. First up, I'll call from Councillor Brand.
4.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
Councillor Crawford.
4.
Councillor Gross.
4.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic.
4.
Councillor Voss. 4. Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
That motion is unanimously carried and now forms part of the part of the substantial motion. Okay, would anyone like to speak to the substantial motion? Councillor Brand, you'd like to speak again?
Yes, I would like to.
Yes.
Because I think this is emblematic of the best things that Council can do for its community, especially as it's in terms of the local economy. I am constantly trying to push for sort of financial assistance and what have you, from a bit more from Council and what have you. But I think, you know, this sort of stuff which is to do with regulation, and in this case sort of a degree of deregulation or opportunistic, nimble opportunistic deregulation of things, is something which we can really contribute to everybody's advantage without costing lots of money to us as well, but hopefully making a lot of money, or a bit more money for our traders. It's just a really good idea. It's great that the CEO is so keen and willing to take on these judgment calls, which we're asking him to do with his staff, helping, of course, of just what would be a good idea in the current circumstances. Let's not worry too much about the long-term questions about how policy should be handled. As long as it passes a few checks and balances, we should be able to do this in a state of difficulty and emergency, and just make things better. And, you know, we might find that this sort of regulation actually extends further and becomes a feature. I know that there's been some places in the city, in Albert Park in particular, where the extension of trade beyond the traders' immediate shop front has worked beautifully in a synergistic way for the whole street. And I just think it's great that we can have the ability now just to say, have a look at it, let's get on with it. It'll be great. Off you go. And here's a way of accompanying it with the liquor licensing as well. And good luck to everybody who can take advantage of it. Best of luck.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Councillor Crawford, would you like to close?
Just that we are, as a council, looking for opportunities to help support our traders in this really difficult time, and we are very aware of the hardship that you're going through.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Crawford. I'll now put that vote under division and call upon Councillor's name. Again, first up, Councillor Brand.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford.
For.
Councillor Gross.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
For.
Councillor Simic.
For.
Councillor Voss. For. Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, 14.1, proposed sale of drainage reserve, abutting 115, 117 and 119 Glen Huntley Road, Elwood. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Crawford?
I apologise if I missed it. I was wondering, I thought this came to us a long time ago, and I'm unsure of, did it not get sold, or is this the second part to the process? I just have a feeling it was a very long time ago. I just wanted clarity around where in the process we are.
Ms McNeil?
Through you, ma'am, my understanding is this is the first time this particular one has come to council.
Yes, there's been similar ones. Any further questions? Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for this or something different? Councillor Gross to move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Gross, would you like to speak to the motion?
No, thank you, Madam Mayor. I think it's quite self-explanatory.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford? No. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? No. Then we'll put the motion, and I'll put that under division. Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
In favour.
Councillor Simic?
For.
Councillor Voss? For. Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, we're getting to 14.2, which is the notice of intention to lease or commence the South Melbourne Community Chest, incorporated at the Opportunity Shop. Any questions of the officers, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Pearl to move. Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak to the motion? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion?
Yes.
Councillor Brand? Councillor Brand, please unmute.
What a good idea. Just want to say what a great institution this is. It's been an important part of the South Melbourne community for a long time, mate. I just don't know the history. I've been told the history of it. The history of it is impressive, along with so much of the pioneering social welfare things that the city of South Melbourne developed, I guess mid-century, last century. And this is one of them. It just pumps out money to give to organisations. I think it was 29 organisations or something that it currently, or over a period, has funneled funds to, and it's just a great organisation, and it's exactly the sort of thing that Council should be assisting and facilitating, and I'm pleased that we're doing it. And very well done to them, and good on us, and good on this tradition in South Melbourne.
I'll also speak to the motion. I have attended all their annual grant giving workshops over the last 7 years or so, and each one of them is truly a wonderful event. It just makes you feel good inside. This organisation just recycles clothes. Basically, it's a little op shop. I take my clothes and my kids' toys when they don't need them anymore there. But it gives meaningful work to volunteers. It provides items to people at affordable prices, and all the money goes back in grants in the annual giving process that is really celebrated across the whole of the city of Port Phillip. I think once upon a time it probably only went to those people in South Melbourne and around, but now it goes across the whole of the city of Port Phillip. So it's truly wonderful. I think 29 organisations over the last 5 years have been awarded $260,000, which is quite incredible. You know, we could look at it as though, well, we could get rent at market price from that, which is probably maybe would add up to more than that money. But the whole process and circular economy, if you like, of what is happening there is truly wonderful, and I would encourage you know, this type of thing to keep going. It is quite special. Councillor Pearl, would you like to close?
Yes, please. So thanks to Gary and his committee, who have obviously been working very, very hard. I always enjoy going to the presentation ceremonies and hearing the stories behind the money that's been given out here. Tiny amounts of money come from direct donations into the chest. 94% of their money comes from effectively their sales. And it's a slow and steady business which is backed by a very large number of volunteers that predominantly come from South Melbourne, but there's also a few that I've met while still knocking down in Port Melbourne. So a good, slow and steady business which compounded over many, many decades has changed a large number of people's lives in our community. There's probably demands on this building from a lease point of view, but based on the history of benefit that this organisation has provided, the community should feel assured that with the governance that they have in place, with Gary, Richard and Anne, etc., working hard to ensure that the viability of the organisation stays forward, particularly keeping up to date with things like occupational health and safety, etc. So I think ratepayers are getting value for money and have done so for a very long period of time. So happy to commend this report, and hopefully all councillors will support it also. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pearl. Then I'll put that motion under division and call upon each councillor's vote. Councillor Gross.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
For.
Councillor Simic.
For.
Councillor Voss. For. Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brand.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford. For. That motion's unanimously carried. Item 14.3 is Assemblies of Council. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? If not, do I have a mover or a seconder? Councillor Pearl to move. Councillor Copsey to second. Councillor Pearl, would you like to speak? Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak? Would anyone else like to speak? Then again, I'll put that motion under division. Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
I think Councillor Gross went first last time, actually, but I'm for.
He did. Councillor Simic? Councillor Simic?
For.
Just hear you. Okay. Councillor Voss, for. Councillor Baxter?
For.
Councillor Bond?
For.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
For.
Councillor Crawford?
For.
That motion's unanimously carried. Thank you. Move to 14.4, which is the public transparency policy, the adoption of draft policy for consultation. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? I have a question. I actually have two questions, please, of Miss Bennett's. It talks about dumped rubbish in the policy, and that it'll be information will be stored on the website. I'm just curious about, that's a very fast moving item, and how are we going to keep that updated if that was one of our items that we're going to be transparent about where it's being dumped?
Through you, Madam Mayor, that particular piece of information is information that Council currently has available through its open data sets. How we go about making sure that that information is updated. One of my colleagues might be better placed to answer that question, but in terms of that information, that is information that's available currently to the community on our open data set website.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I can expand on Miss Bennett's comment.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
No problem. So through you, Mayor, council officers record all dumped rubbish information into council's current systems. Council's ongoing investment into the customer experience program is going to provide a greater platform to be able to capture that data quickly and be able to ensure that it's accurate, to both provide it for the public through the open data initiative, but also use it to guide council service delivery.
Thank you. And just a follow-up question on that before I go to the other councillors' questions. How will this data actually be stored, and how will it be searchable by the community? Are you able to sort of explain that?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might need to defer to Miss Bennett, or if Miss Bennett isn't able to answer the question, I might take that on notice.
Mm-hmm. Ms Bennett?
Through you, Madam Mayor, I think we'd need to take that question on notice.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bond?
It's Councillor Pearl.
Councillor Pearl, right.
Okay, under 1.2.4 available data, data sets available. Just wondering, is there any plans or ability for us to publish a street sweeping map of the city of when streets were swept the last time under this policy potentially?
Mr. Johnson.
Through you, Madam Mayor, Council already publishes a static map that sort of spells out the 4-week cleansing cycle for the city, but it is, as I say, static. It sort of forewarns the community as to when streets are going to be swept. Council's currently in a process of investing in a technology solution that will enable us to do exactly what Councillor Pearl has referred to, so provide near live information on when streets are to be swept, when they've last been swept, and make that information available to the community.
Great, thank you. Any further questions, councillors? If not, we have an officer's recommendation. Do I have a mover for that or something different? Councillor Copsey to move. I'm happy to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? No, I don't need to speak to the motion either. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Then I'll put that motion. All those in favour, and again under division, Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic. Councillor Voss. 4. Councillor Baxter.
4.
Councillor Bond.
4.
Councillor Brand.
4.
Councillor Copsey.
4.
Councillor Crawford.
4.
Councillor Gross.
4.
That motion is unanimously carried. Okay, 14.5, governance rules, which is incorporating the election period policy. The adoption of drafts for consultation. Councillors, do you have any questions of the officers? Councillor Pearl.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much. Under Chapter 5, Disclosure of Conflict of Interest, subsection 3.2, the information that's provided to the CEO relating to the specifics of a conflict of interest, namely the nature of the conflict and detailing where gifts come from, the name of the person, etc. I'm just wondering, is that information publicly available, and how would it be made publicly available? How would members of the public access that information so they can find details of the conflict of interest that's been declared?
Okay, Ms Bennett.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might ask Ms Pearce to respond to that one.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would need to take that question on notice to provide a more thorough answer. It may be that Council could include within its public transparency policy a register of conflicts of interest. There are mechanisms within the Local Government Act in which Council could report those conflicts. I would also need to review the legislation to understand a public inspection availability of those documents. So I'll take that on notice and come back to Council with a complete answer.
Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I might just add, and if, as this is a draft that is going out for community consultation, we can follow that up during this period, and Council can consider that when they receive this in its final version in August.
Great. I also have just a minor question around perhaps formatting. 4.4.4C, my document, I'm not sure if that's the end of the paragraph, and I just wanted to draw that to your attention, that maybe in the version that goes out that there may be something extra that's missing there.
Thank you for the feedback, Madam Mayor. We'll check that before it's released for consultation.
Thank you. Any further questions, councillors? Is that another question, Councillor Pearl? Yes.
Thanks very much. Just to follow on to my previous one to Ms Bennett, if possible. I'm assuming, I don't want to complicate things, so I'm assuming an amendment to the officer's recommendation isn't required for that matter to come back in the next report. Can it just be noted, and can it come back? Can the answer to that question come back in the final report that comes to Council? Or do I need to make an amendment?
Through you, Madam Mayor, as officers, we're certainly happy to give an undertaking to do that piece of work and include that in the final report that comes back to Council. Certainly for clarity, if you wish to, Councillor, you could make an amendment, but we're very happy to give an undertaking.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
I guess I just wanted to clarify, if I may, when it talks about the various in 4.4.4b, the false or misleading information on particulars for the upcoming election, what kind of, is there any more detail around the kind of false or misleading material that that could be used and would be an indictable offence?
Ms Bennett?
Yes, I'll just need one quick moment. I won't. I might get Ms Pearce. She has easier access to that information than I do. Ms Pearce?
Through you, Madam Mayor, at the provision that Councillor Crawford is referring to, the false or misleading information is lifted directly from Section 293 of the Local Government Act. The Local Government Inspectorate is the integrity agency for investigating all offences under the Act, including electoral offences. The Inspectorate's the primary agency to receive, assess and investigate matters and offences related to the electoral provisions. Given that Council has no role in the regulation of electoral offences, it is difficult for officers to advise what the Inspectorate would judge or determine to be misleading or false materials. In terms of councillors or candidates receiving further information, the VEC's election manager will conduct an information session for prospective candidates. Through this information session, we expect that candidates would receive handbooks and detailed information to provide greater clarity around the electoral offences, including a greater definition of false or misleading information. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearce. I also have a question around how petitions are presented. I noticed in this document, it's not our current practice for councillors to present petitions. I'm wondering, it's now been included. Is that also a change in the Act? Ms. Bennett or Ms. Pearce?
Through you, Madam Mayor, this is an interpretation of general meeting procedures. So we will be really happy to receive councillor feedback on whether this suits the intent of council, and we will come back with councillors through briefings and public feedback sessions to understand if this is a provision that is preferable to councillors or not.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Bond, question?
Yeah, I'd just like to come back to 4.4.4 Part B.
Yep.
And clarify that false or misleading information with those penalties is only in relation to voter enrolment and not to general campaign materials.
If that's a question?
Yes, that's the question. Or could they clarify that false or misleading information or particulars only relates to voter enrolment, not to general campaign materials, and those penalties only apply to voter enrolment misinformation, not flyer misinformation, as I think some people may misinterpret that statement to mean.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the Act refers to it as false or misleading in material, particular in any information provided orally or in writing in relation to voter enrolment, or in any declaration or application in relation to an election under this Act or the regulations.
So just to be clear, that excludes campaign material.
Through you, Madam Mayor, we would need to consult with the Inspectorate to determine an absolute correct answer for councillors, as this is outside of council's jurisdiction in delivering the election.
Okay, so will you take that on notice?
Absolutely, Madam Mayor, and I'll come back to council with an answer.
Thank you. Councillor Crawford.
No, that was just to clarify on that point as well, whether it's campaign materials or just your how to votes. Thank you.
All right, great. Okay, so this is just going out to consultation. Councillors, any further questions before I ask for a mover? Council, was that a question from you, Mr. Smith? No. Sorry, you're... No, okay. All right, councillors, do I have a mover for this item? For the officer's recommendation, Councillor Copsey to move, Councillor Crawford to second. Councillor Copsey, would you like to speak to the motion? No. Councillor Crawford, would you like to speak to the motion? Would anyone else like to speak to the motion? Then I'm going to put that motion again under division. Councillor Simic.
4.
Councillor Voss, 4. Councillor Baxter?
4.
Councillor Bond?
4.
Councillor Brand?
4.
Councillor Copsey?
4.
Councillor Crawford?
4.
Councillor Gross?
4.
Councillor Pearl?
In favour.
That motion is unanimously carried. Thank you. Okay, so now we're up to notices of motion. Councillors, we've got one notice of motion tonight. Item 15.1 is a notice of motion raised by Councillor Gross in relation to Planning Scheme Amendment C171 Port. Before Councillor Gross moves this motion, I'm going to offer the opportunity to councillors to ask questions. Do you have any questions of the officers in relation to this item? Councillor Brand has a question. Yes, Councillor Brand.
Yes. In terms of the recommendations of the panel to council on the matter of consultation, we also consulted the Department of Elwood, and they seem to have a different position on it. I'm wondering if that position can be clarified between the department and the panel on this particular on the process of public consultation in this sort of situation. I can't hear anything.
Neither can I.
Please, Mr. Rosick.
Through you, Madam Mayor. That is correct, Councillor Brand. I'll invite the Manager of Strategic Planning to provide a response, Mr. Damien Dwyer.
Through you, Madam Mayor. It is true that at an officer level we did have conversations with DELP in relation to their view on including the panel recommendation regarding consultation. The panel process is an independent process, and therefore the department won't be able to ask the panel to confirm what it meant when it made that particular recommendation.
Sorry,
I've lost. Sorry. Yes, Councillor Brand.
I guess, look, that's about the status of DELP's, the department's comment. Is that comment a completely informal one, which therefore doesn't shouldn't even be aired, or is it something which they have a best practice policy on, or something? I know that there's a difference of opinion, but if it doesn't count for anything, then we maybe shouldn't air it. But if it does count for something, I'd be keen to know what the point of difference is.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the DELP officer's answer was in relation to the development plan overlay mechanism, which is the mechanism which doesn't normally allow community consultation, and the DELP officers felt that that the panel's recommendation was likely to conflict with the way that the development plan process would normally work, because the development plans don't normally include an engagement process as a part of them, because you do that at the beginning of the process, as we did with the site brief, for example, and not once, not in and as part of the development of the development plan itself.
And if I could add to Mr. Dwyer's response through you, Madam Mayor, the Council's consideration last week when this matter was presented to Council for endorsement was to consider the Council officer's response to the panel recommendations, so not necessarily to DELP. So it was to the panel recommendations.
Thank you, Ms. Rosick. Any further questions? Councillors, we have an officer's recommendation Sorry, Councillor Gross, would you like to move the motion?
Yes, could I, I'll please move the motion and I'll speak to it if I get a second.
Sorry, Madam Mayor. Through you, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Just in the wording of, oh, it's all right, it's been changed in the on the screen to the council report. Thank you. There was just some grammatical errors in the notice. It's been changed. Apologies.
Thank you. Councillor Gross, go ahead. Can you please read your motion? And then
The Council 1 notes at the Council meeting of 17 June, Council considered the report and recommendations of the Independent Planning Panel appointed by the Minister for Planning on the St Kilda Marina. 2 notes that it adopted C171 Port to the Port Phillip Planning Scheme pursuant to Section 29 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987, the Act, with changes reflected in the amendment documentation in attachment 4 to the Council report. 3, Council notes the Planning Panel recommended that the amendment include a new requirement in DPO2 for a community consultation report as part of the presentation of the development plan. The purpose of this report is to outline the community consultation undertaken to inform the preparation of the development plan, with but not limited to the Officer of the Victorian Government, Transport for Victoria and neighbouring owners and occupiers. Sorry, I can't read the rest. I'll just go to my Teams thing.
it's on the screen, Dick. Councillor Gross.
Right. 4, notes at the meeting of 17 June, Council's adoption did not include the community consultation recommendation, para 3 above. 5, notes that since that meeting, members of the community have expressed concern that the developer will not be required to undertake consultation prior to submitting the development plan, and that Council now considers this to be a requirement. 6, now writes to Minister Wynne, who is considering both the panel's report and the Council decision of 17 June, and informs him that because of the community's feedback, Council now regards the additional community consultations necessary and advises the Minister for Planning the Council has made a subsequent resolution now accepts all of the panel's recommendations, including the recommendation to include a requirement for a community engagement report as part of the content of the development plan in DPO.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Brandt to second. Councillor Gross, please speak to your motion.
Councillors, I urge you to support this particular motion. Let's go over the complex history of consultation on this site. And I remind you that this is going to be one of the more important decisions made in the life of this council. So I think it's really important that we try to get it right. And council's had a lot of consultation. Some of it's been very wide, and we consulted with the whole community, including pop-up stands that were very popular, and people spoke to us about the marina. And then we had, after that wide consultation, we had very narrow and deep consultation with a community committee. Now, the issue with that consultation is that sometimes it's forgotten. People have departed from Elwood, new arrivals in Elwood and St Kilda, death and poor memories mean that that level of consultation needs to be revisited so that those who didn't take an interest at that early time get an opportunity to express their view. So that's why I'm asking the council to accept the independent panel's recommendation for the successful marina tenderer to consult and provide an community engagement report. Now, I remind everyone, ourselves, if this gets up, the community, that there will be constraints on this consultation. So much has happened in terms of writing a tender, writing planning rules, that, you know, there is a degree of constraint. It's not about going back to the drawing board and starting again. That's not what this is about. But it is about we've reached the pointy end. And at the pointy end, there are people who have missed out on consultation or forgotten they were consulted, who may want to express a view again. And the point about this consultation is at this stage, it appears to be an early stage rather than the other proposal for consultation that the council runs that that would come later and not have the same legitimacy as this proposal. I think that it's really important that we appear as squeaky clean as we possibly can on this, and it enhances our legitimacy, and it enhances our ability to relate to a community that is justifiably apprehensive about what's going to go on that incredibly important and very vast side. So I don't think this would be too onerous for the successful tenderer, because it will just be making a consultation report, and I don't think that that's going to be too onerous. And secondly, I really think that it's a good look if we adopt all of the planning panel's report, because I know we have a right not to accept everything that the planning panel says. The system assumes that we have the right to disagree. But it has been expressed to me that it looks as though we've been selective in those and cherry-picked the provisions that we're recommending to the Minister. And I think it would be a better look if we had a comprehensive acceptance of the planning panel and not appear to have advanced. I don't believe that we did advance our own interests by changing that, but it might appear to other observers that we weren't cognizant of other people's interests. So I think it's important. This will attract controversy, and I think it's important that at every stage of the process we seek to maximise and appear to seek to maximise the ability of neighbours and the community to have a chat. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. Councillor Brand. Councillor Brand, would you like to speak to the motion?
Certainly would. In fact, I already was, but nobody was listening until I pressed the unmute button. Yes, I would. Where was I? The more I've looked at this, the more I feel that this there are fewer and fewer reasons against following the just taking the panel's recommendation and saying yes, we'll do that. There are a few things to note about it. None of the consultation that's going to go on from now on is actually what we term statutory consultation. It's just it's just better practice to do as much of it as we can. And the big moment is really going to be in the submission of the development plan, where council will have to do its own advertising and public consultation on that anyway. So there are a whole lot of other things that other moments where the public will be consulted, including on the lease, which will come to the public soon, whether on the question of actually signing a lease, and then on the development plan, there are all sorts of points where public consultation will happen. But this is an extra one, and I think we've maybe made the mistake that we were thinking that this would in somehow replace any of the other public consultation opportunities. I think this is, and if it did actually replace it, I think we'd be in trouble, because we'd be playing one off against another, and what would be the most effective thing. I think this is actually, if we look at it as just an extra opportunity for consultation at another point in the process, I think that's fine. If it was replacing a council consultation, I think it's a problem, because on every point that a decision needs to be made, it's a decision by council, whether it's on the lease, whether it's on the development plan. Council are the people who need to be making the decision, so that we need to consult directly to our community in making that decision. And I wouldn't want to see any of that replaced by a consultation that was made by the developer, which might inform them, but it is not something which the public would not be informing the decision maker in that case. Council will always be the decision maker, and so we always have to consult our community when we make decisions. But I think it's really good to have a consultation here. There's no question that once I guess winning concept plan comes out of the tender process and the lease is signed, we have a concept plan that needs to be turned into a development plan, and there's no question in my mind that the public all have to be involved in this, in that process too. Whether it's in information sessions, question and answer sessions, tours of the site, whatever it is. We're all curious, to see what the concept plan is, how it works, understand it better, ask questions about it, voice concerns about it. This is absolutely basic, and obviously the winning tenderers, the developers need to hear this and understand it. So I think this is what the panel is probably asking for. Along with that, there are the particular formal channels that we have to pursue as decision makers, and we will do that too. So I don't see no harm in this if it's framed in that sense. I think we just have to understand that this is not replacing the other forms of consultation which are necessary. It's supplementing it, and we've got to do it. There's, as Councillor Gross also said, the other point that I do want to make is, of course, the brief has already been consulted on. We cannot change the brief at this point. There's been months and months and months of deep, intense technical negotiation through the whole tender process, which has probably slightly amended the brief or slightly reinterpreted or changed it slightly, but not hugely at all, and those things need to be understood by the public when things emerge. But generally speaking, this is not a time when we're going to change the brief. That's been done. We're going to look at try and understand the response to it, and then within that framework, come up with other suggestions of how the same thing might be achieved, points of improvement. Mr. Holland's, sort of illustration of example of traffic arrangements that might be improved. That's just good local knowledge being fed into it. I'm looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to going all over the site with the local residents and looking at it again in the light of the concept plan and getting on with it. So I'm pretty happy to, on those terms, to be supporting this notice of motion. this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Brand. Would anyone else like to speak for or against the motion? Councillor Bond.
I'll be speaking against this motion, and I'm actually quite puzzled as to why councillors wish to hand over the responsibility for consulting on what is a City of Port Phillip project to the developer. And I'm puzzled for a number of reasons. Firstly, the developer, successful developer, whoever they are, has a contractual arrangement with the City of Port Phillip, or will have a contractual arrangement with the City of Port Phillip, and a design and development overlay compliance they need to meet. So I think people seem to be getting misled that if the developer does some sort of consultation, they can turn around and change the proposal. They're not going to be able to without input from the City of Port Phillip. They can consult all they want, but they really cannot change their proposal. The second bit that concerns me is that we're asking a developer to consult and report back on a proposal, a consultation on a proposal that they are the developer for. So there's a small element of putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank here, in that we're asking them to tell us what they heard the community say. I don't agree that we should be doing that. I think that it's council is best placed to undertake the consultation. And whilst we are conflicted, the planning panel made that clear that we play a number of roles here as a council, and as a result of that, we are a little bit conflicted. But there's one other party to this who is more conflicted than we are, and that is the developer. So while you're trying to transfer the responsibility for coming up with a community engagement report to the developer, I don't know. I can see, yes, there are problems with council doing the community engagement report. It's probably not the best option because we are conflicted, but out of the two options here, it is definitely the least worst option. There also seems to be some sort of misconception that if one party undertakes the consultation or the community engagement report, that means the other party won't have to do anything. No matter which party does this, I think both council will be and the developer will be consulting widely with the community on this, but only one of us has the ability to change the development plan and change the design and development overlay for that particular site and be party to the contractual negotiations about changing that. So I think this would be a huge mistake to hand this responsibility over to the developer. I can't work out why people want to do that. It just makes no sense to me. As I said, I'm very puzzled by this request. There's been very little community feedback to me from people requesting this. So it's not like there's this massive groundswell of support, people demanding that we do this. There just hasn't been the case. There's been one or two emails in the last 24 hours from people who live in the nearby facility or sort of have a vested interest in this. There's no groundswell from the community for us to do this, so I won't be supporting this. I will be sticking with our original council decision from the 17th of June, and I urge my fellow councillors to stick with that decision also.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Would anyone else like to speak for or against this motion?
Is it possible to ask a technical question of officers at this stage? I can't hear, I'm afraid.
Yes.
Oh, yes was the answer.
Yes.
Okay, look, my question would be, you can work out, Mayor, how this should be related. Is there in this motion an implication that a responsibility would be handed over from council to someone else? A responsibility for a key part of the process? Or would it just be supplemented?
Okay. Ms. Rosick?
Yes, through you, Madam Mayor. The decision that Council made on the 17th of June at the Council meeting was that Council will undertake non-statutory consultation on the development plan once the application is received, prior to making any decisions on planning decisions on the development plan. So that decision still stands. If Council endorses this motion, notice of motion, there'll be an additional requirement through if it's accepted, obviously, by the Minister. We will write to the Council will write to the Minister if this notice of motion is endorsed to advise that Council also accepts the panel recommendation that the developer also undertakes develops a community engagement report, which does involve consultation as part of the development, preparing the development plan, and that will have to be presented to Council. The guidelines around what's included is not specified except for the parties that need to be engaged as part of the development of the community engagement report. So there will be two engagement processes.
Thank you, Ms. Rosick.
Thank you.
All right, since there are no further speakers to this item, Councillor Gross, would you like to close?
Thanks very much, Madam Mayor. Councillor Bond, with respect, I think you've misunderstood the point of this resolution. It is absolutely not to replace Council's role in the deathbed repentance consultation that we allocated ourselves at the last meeting. That remains. It's not to replace, it is to augment. Secondly, not only does it augment the consultation that we said that we agreed to do, as Ms. Rosic said, but it means that we're going to be in accordance with the expert planning panel, which I think is a good look. So I think that the fear that we've, of course, if we abandoned our role in organising the consultation, it might be like putting Dracula in charge of the blood bank, but we're not doing that. We're simply augmenting it and allowing the community to have a bit of a voice early on in the very final death throes of this process. And finally, I've heard people say, oh, hitherto they haven't heard any complaint, there's been no feedback. You wait. As soon as this design comes into the public realm, it will be the subject of tremendous controversy and discussion. And I, of course, welcome that. But the community doesn't get really excited about something while it's intangible. And at the moment, it's intangible, it's an idea. Let's take an ageing marina and refurb it. It's sort of not tangible and real enough to excite public opinion. But when it becomes real, that's when we have to be able to say, we've used every single opportunity to listen to the community. And people will say, oh, look, there's no third-party rights of appeal at VCAT. There isn't in hundreds of applications every year, but it will be seen as a major point of grievance unless we can say to the community that every single opportunity to consult has been grasped, treasured, and offered to the community. And so I think it's really important, and I urge you all to vote for it.
Thank you, Councillor Gross. I will now put that motion under division and call upon each councillor for your vote. Councillor Voss? Against? Councillor Baxter?
Against.
Councillor Bond?
Against.
Councillor Brand?
For.
Councillor Copsey?
Against.
Councillor Crawford?
Against.
Councillor Gross?
For.
Councillor Pearl?
Against.
Councillor Simic?
Abstain.
Abstain. That motion has failed. Now move to item 16, reports by councillor delegates. Councillors, do we have any reports? Not tonight. Okay, we'll go to item 17, urgent business. Do we have any items of urgent business? There are none. Move to item 18, which is confidential matters. And councillors, we have one confidential item tonight, being 18.1, which is 331 to 335 St Kilda Road, St Kilda. So I call on a councillor to move that the meeting be closed to members of the public to consider this confidential item. Okay, we've got Councillor Bond to move and Councillor Pearl to second. Is that correct? Yes, okay. And I'm going to close the meeting to the members of the public in accordance with Section 3E of the Local Government Act 2020 as the item relates to legally privileged information. I'll now put that motion under division and call upon each councillor for your vote. Councillor Baxter.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brand.
For.
Councillor Copsey.
For.
Councillor Crawford. For. Councillor Gross.
For.
Councillor Pearl.
In favour.
Councillor Simic.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Voss, for. That motion is carried. So councillors, will now conclude the open part of this meeting in WebEx, and we'll move to Microsoft Teams to consider the confidential item. I advise the members of the public that as there are no further open items to be discussed, this will be the conclusion of the public meeting. Thank you for joining us tonight.